Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
Climate change has been called the greatest existential threat of our time, and it has already had devastating effects on people throughout the world. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates is one of the world's most prominent business leaders and philanthropists. And in his new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, the Solutions We Have and the Breakthroughs We Need, he outlines how his own thinking on the topic has evolved over the years. And he describes a path forward that he says everybody can participate in some way. Now, I've watched multiple interviews with Gates, one of which was while he was being interviewed eating a burger at a burger joint with the interviewer. I've heard him say more than once, I just really like hamburgers. Well, don't we all? I've been struck by the convenience of Bill's climate solutions, much like Al Gore admitting when he was asked why he didn't include animal agriculture in the inconvenient truth, saying, well, it's really just too inconvenient of a truth. But by that very statement, admitting there is truth that animal agriculture is part of the problem of our temperature rising on planet Earth. I think with great influence comes great responsibility, and I find it to be very self-serving and also saddening that some of our great thinkers proposing solutions for climate change are willing to omit one of our biggest issues because they like burgers and therefore don't want to make it a thing of the destructive nature of animal agriculture. Here are the very astounding facts. The industrial livestock system is responsible for 14.5%, some say much more, but we know at least that, of global emissions. 99% of the animal foods we eat come from this massive animal agriculture production. 23% of the world's fresh water goes to the industrial animal agriculture system, while nearly 700 million people suffer from water scarcity. 40% of the world's grain is fed to farm animals, while nearly 1 billion people go to bed hungry every night. The world population is expected to reach 10 billion by 2050. If our rate of animal consumption continues, we will need 50% more land and have to produce more food in the next 40 years than in the past 10,000 years combined. An Oxford University study published in Science determined that eating an animal-free diet is the single biggest way an individual can reduce their environmental impact. Alexandra, I'm pretty pumped, as are you, to have this guest on today who addresses this very issue. I have been pining on his newest book, Food is Climate, a response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawkins, and the conventional narrative on climate change. But you wage this war almost daily in your work. You do such profound work in this area and speak about it really better than anyone I know. Why do you think some of the most vocal supposed climate defenders delete the conversation on eating animals?
God, that is such, Dotsie, you're asking me the age-old question of why people either can't change or don't have the courage to stand out. Because I see it in my own life, even though I work towards trying to make the environment a safer place for every being, There are things that I do that are, I still, buy things that I want instead of need, and I drive a car. I own too many things. So I think a lot of it is this fight in every human, and it happens with our health and also our values is what we want now and then the long-term good of ourselves and the future. Humans are not biologically programmed to think long term. We are more about, running away from the lion when the lion is right there. And also the other thing is that interesting metaphor, which was about the frogs. Have you heard that, Dotsie? We talked about it, how
I don't think so.
if you put a frog in water
Yeah.
and you just turn up the temperature slowly, that frog will slowly adapt to the higher water until that frog dies, because their adaptation, it's not till it's too late where they realize, oh, this is too darn hot. If you were to throw that frog into boiling water, the frog would jump out immediately. And we are basically boiling ourselves to death on a very slow temperature. Slow for us. You're slow for the planet. We can't see it enough. And I think you're going to address this when you talk to Glenn. You had a question in our discussion with Glenn where you ask this very question. And you also note that a lot of us we know there's a problem, but we just don't do anything about it. And I think maybe our listeners will start to ask themselves, like, why am I not doing enough? Because I don't think any of us in the United States of America are doing enough, because our lifestyle is already too high to accommodate the 10 billion people that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's just perfectly apropos that you stated that we are just really not biologically designed to think about 50 years from now or even 10 years from now in our daily habit choices. And I guess the only way that we are biologically designed to not think, but behave for the future is in some of us's desire to reproduce, right? And that certainly goes back to a time when we needed to populate the planet, which we are not in that situation anymore. But we do, we have a pretty extraordinary conversation with our guest, Glen Merzer, and I'm excited to jump in. And I also just can't help myself but to say, spoiler alert, make sure you stay to the end of the episode to find out how David Hasselhoff ruined our guest Glen Merzer's screenwriting career. that's in there at the end after a really big, important, and life-changing conversation. So let's dive in. Our guest today has co-authored several books from former guests of this podcast like Chef AJ and Howard Lyman. Glen Merzer is an author, a playwright, and screenwriter who just came out with a new book, Food is Climate, a response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawkins, and the conventional narrative on climate change. He's not afraid to call out world leaders and say they are simply not doing enough. He also co-authored the legendary Mad Cowboy with Howard Lyman, Unprocessed with Chef AJ, and several other plant-based guidebooks and cookbooks, including Own Your Health. Glen has been vegetarian for over 40 years, way before it was cool, and a vegan for about half that time. Today, we are not going to hold back. Let's talk food, climate, and politics. Welcome to the show, Glen.
Thank you, Dotsie. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we're really stoked to have you. You have such an interesting past and current, and I'm sure future, but you're a former stand-up comic who let me start that again, because you're not a comet, you're a comic.
You might be a comic.
You are a former stand-up comic who fell into playwriting. You worked as a writer on network TV, definitely found your niche writing about the plant-based diet. Your first novel, Off the Reservation, serves really as both kind of political commentary and also advocates for the plant-based diet. It's about a vegan congressman who runs for president, which hopefully that's actually going to happen sometime soon in the next 8 to 10 years. But I want to start with you, Glen, and how did you end up going vegetarian and then vegan and becoming what we consider such a resounding figure in this movement?
Well, thank you for the question. I really stumbled into it. I became a vegetarian at the age of 17, just for my own health. Not that I had any health problems, but that so many relatives had died of heart attacks. When I was 16 and 17, I had 2 uncles die. My mother's 2 brothers die of heart attacks. My grandparents were dead before I was born or knew them. On my father's side of the family, most of the men died in their 50s. So I did the math and I figured I would be middle-aged at 25. And I didn't want to be middle-aged at 25. And I had heard the comedian Dick Gregory speak about vegetarianism. And I just followed his advice and I gave up meat when I was 17. But I had an obese aunt and uncle who were very alarmed when I gave up meat. And the first thing they said to me is, "Where are you going to get your protein?" And I got scared and I said, "From cheese." I just guessed that there must be protein in cheese. And so I kept eating cheese for the protein. It was the only animal product I ate, but I ate that for about the next 30 years or next 19 years. I ate cheese until I was in my mid 30s. And then I started getting heart pains. And I didn't go to the doctor. I just decided to give up cheese and I never got heart pains again. So again, and I was just a little too slow to get there now looking back, since it took me 19 years. But in those days, that was the early 90s. There weren't that many vegans around. And most people thought it was odd enough that I was a vegetarian.
How did you become a writer and co-writer of books about veganism?
Yeah, well, what happened was I had a friend in Los Angeles named Mar who was in the vegan movement, and she introduced me to Howard Lyman. Mm. And they pitched the idea of a screenplay based on Howard's life. And Howard has a great story. He's a great friend of mine now. His story is basically, he was a 4th generation cattle rancher turned vegan and animal rights activist. And so that story has a great arc, but I know screenwriting well enough to know that you need a 3rd act climax. And I thought, after hearing Howard pitch to me his story, if the 3rd act climax is ordering the stir-fried vegetables, I didn't know how to do it. So I told Howard, I hope someone could write this, but I can't figure out how to turn this into a movie. And Morris said, well, then how about a book? And I had never written a nonfiction book before, but I knew it didn't really need a 3rd act climax. So I said I could try. And Howard and I wrote Mad Cowboy.
And this was before, because if he'd contacted you a few years later, this was before he went on Oprah, right? Because he went on Oprah because of the book. And then that might have been a 3rd act climax about how to get her out of jail.
Yeah. Which is, let me correct you there. He didn't actually go on Oprah because of the book. The book actually hadn't come out yet. He went on Oprah as an expert on mad cow disease.
Okay.
And it was because she was asking him questions about mad cow disease, and he was explaining that in America at the time, we chopped up cows and fed them back to cows. And that's what they were doing in England, and that was the cause of mad cow disease. And Oprah said, that does it. I'm not going to have another hamburger. And there were some deranged cattle ranchers who felt that she didn't have a right to say that, and it caused the price of beef futures to plummet, and they sued. So that was the genesis of that lawsuit.
Yeah. You've actually co-authored two of his books. You guys started with Mad Cowboy, but also the book No Bull. What type of influences did Howard have on you? I mean, you're already pretty far along the track of understanding what a plant-based diet could do for your health. But certainly Howard, because we've had him on our podcast, as I've mentioned, is a valiant animal rights activist at the core. How did he rub off on you?
Well, Howard and I became great friends immediately, but mainly to talk about his effect on my life, he got me into book writing. I had never thought of writing a nonfiction book before. And so Mad Cowboy was the first one. And he also introduced me to other people in the movement. And for Mad Cowboy, he directed a lot of my research. So I just started learning more about it. Remember, this was something I had only done because I didn't want to die at 50.
Right.
And now through Howard, I learned what animal agriculture was doing to our rivers and streams, what it was doing to our forests, how it was affecting the air. So I learned a lot through that experience of writing Mad Cowboy. But I didn't yet learn what I learned writing this last book, Food is Climate, which is how it is the leading cause of climate change. Animal agriculture is the reason we're facing an existential crisis here. The ability to breathe is being threatened by the fact that so many people around the world eat animals.
Let's talk about your new book, Food is Climate, a response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawkins, and the conventional narrative on climate change. Of course, this is really timely now because the climate talks for this year, COP26, just ended. And there's been a lot of dissatisfaction from folks in our community about the fact that food systems weren't really discussed, or there wasn't enough action on that at COP26. Can you give us an overview of how it was handled, if it was discussed, and what came of that?
Alexandra, this is really a scandal. Once you understand it, and I'm not a scientist, and I feel that I understand the basics here, and I think everybody could understand the basics. Once you understand it, you realize what a scandal it is that so many climatologists, so many of the leaders on climate change, like Al Gore, refuse to talk about this. And we're not going to solve the problem unless there's a global movement towards a plant-based diet. And you just have to, you know how real estate agents always say it's location, location, location? Well, the climate crisis is land use, land use, land use. It's what we're doing to the earth. We are raping the earth. And it's how we are treating the earth that is causing the crisis. So let's start with 70% of the earth, the oceans. The oceans are the greatest carbon sink in the world. About half of our annual emissions get absorbed into the oceans. So we need healthy oceans. And so we need healthy populations of life in the ocean. That means whales and dolphins and fish. And we need healthy sea forests. We need phytoplankton. And so what is the greatest threat to the oceans? Well, there's some threat from plastics, that's true. Some threat from garbage, some threat from shipping, but the greatest threat by far is industrial fishing. That's what's killing the whales. That's what's taking all life out of the ocean and leaving the ocean lifeless. It's the nitrogen fertilizer that's often used to grow feed for cattle that winds up in the streams and rivers and oceans, causing dead zones. The nets that trawl the bottom of the ocean kick up sediment from the bottom of the ocean. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, can't even begin to quantify how much sediment is being dug up from the bottom of the ocean and reducing the carbon capture of the ocean. So we're destroying the oceans mainly because people eat fish. That's 70% of the earth. So if we
But how is that
eating,
related to climate change, Glenn?
because the oceans are a carbon sink. If we have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the oceans can healthfully absorb it, then we're good. And if the phytoplankton are healthy and then we're good. So we need the oceans to help us absorb the carbon emissions. And if the oceans are dead, we're dead. There's something I learned when writing the book, that whale poop helps feed the phytoplankton populations. And the phytoplankton emit a chemical called dimethyl sulfide that rises in the atmosphere, bonds with water vapor, and forms clouds. So the whale poop is indirectly forming clouds, you know, and the clouds cool the earth.
Yeah.
And bring rain. So, you know, it's all a cycle of life that we're interrupting for the stupidity of eating animals that give us heart attacks. So we need the oceans, and then there's the land. On the non-ice land surface of the earth, 40% of it, a little bit over 40%, is dedicated to animals. It's 37% is grazing land, 6% of it is farms used to grow food for animals. So you do a little math, 70% of the earth is being destroyed by fishing, 40% of the land being destroyed by grazing. And the grazing, we're doing what we're doing in the Amazon. We're chopping down the Amazon forest for grazing. And we've done that all over the earth. We've chopped down forests to put sheep and goats and cattle on the land, and they destroy the soil. They reduce the soil. The soil can capture twice as much carbon as trees. So we're degrading the soil. We're creating deserts, and we're losing trees. The trees sequester carbon dioxide. So 80% of the earth is being ruined because people eat animals. If we stopped eating animals, that can heal. Mm-hmm. The earth is a self-healing mechanism.
Yeah, it feels like, and this is definitely a big discussion that we want to have with you around the book, but it feels like there's just this elephant in the room at all times. I have a friend who works in sustainability at the International Olympic Committee, who was at COP26, and she was, and she's a vegan, and she was sending me pictures of the food menus that were there. She said the food was terrible, but the food menus had the carbon waste, the carbon emissions that whatever the food was, whether it was a sweet potato or a hanger burger or whatever it might be. And so you literally could see the pressure that the animals that they were selling for food are putting on the planet in actual broken down into, they had it was basically kind of like a pie chart next to every single food they served. Yet they're at a climate conference. They are selling these foods that have this huge carbon footprint compared to when they had the sweet potato or whatever it might be right next to the burger. You could see the difference and the data. And I remember when Al Gore was asked about why he didn't bring up animal agriculture in Inconvenient Truth. And he said, well, it's just too inconvenient of a truth. But is some of it, do you think it's self-interest why these gentlemen that you wrote the book on don't want to discuss it? They like burgers themselves. I've seen Bill Gates interviewed on the climate at a burger joint with the interviewer. What are the reasons that you uncovered on why it's so irresponsible, it feels like?
Well, it is terribly irresponsible. And I think there's a different reason for each of those three gentlemen, Bill Gates, Al Gore, and Paul Hawken. And I could only speculate. Al Gore is a vegan, I believe, has announced that he's vegan, but he hates to talk about it. It's his least favorite subject to talk about. He likes to say he's just doing it for his own personal reasons. And I think it's that Al Gore has the vestigial instincts of a politician. And if you were running for president today, and I don't expect he's going to run for office again, but if you were running for president, advocating a vegan diet, advocating the kinds of things I advocate, a tax on slaughterhouses and just anything we can do to put an end to that industry, you wouldn't win. And that's just the reality. I mean, if President Biden today started advocating the policies I advocate, the happiest man in America would be President Trump. It just isn't popular. It isn't yet a majority opinion, the opinions we have. And in a democracy, you have to understand that. So I think Al Gore has those instincts of a vestigial politician, and he has friends who are politicians, and maybe he doesn't want to make life uncomfortable for them. Paul Hawken, I have met on a few occasions. He wouldn't remember that. I just met him at events and in passing. But he seems like such a nice guy. I bet he is a really nice guy. And he just doesn't like to make judgments.
For our audience, could you just explain who Paul Hawken is?
Paul Hawken is an economist and an author and a leading spokesman on climate change. He has formed an organization called Drawdown that has 2 books out. One of the books is called Drawdown. He is an expert with a very optimistic view of the different technologies we could use to achieve drawdown. Drawdown is reaching the point at which not only are greenhouse gases not accumulating in the atmosphere, but they're declining. And that's where we have to get. We shouldn't be satisfied with 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide. We should reduce it back towards 350. So Paul Hawken is a leader in the movement, and he's a very nice guy, I'll bet. And he hates to make judgments. And I'm not a judgmental person, I don't think. I try not to go through life judging people harshly if I disagree with them. But when it comes to saving all life on the planet, I think we have to make the judgment that animal agriculture is threatening us all and it has to stop. And that's just one judgment too far for Paul Hawken. He has more the attitude of do whatever you have to do. Have a plant-strong diet. Well, what does a plant-strong diet mean? That you have broccoli with your steak? He doesn't want to define it because he doesn't want to offend people, I think. He doesn't want to anyone feel that he's judging them for eating meat. But that's just not good enough when we're facing an existential emergency.
Why are these speakers, though? They're certainly willing to throw the fossil fuel industry under the bus. So why not animal agriculture? I mean, they're equally as powerful, if fossil fuel, not even more.
Well, I think the difference is that with fossil fuels, most people would be just fine if we could replace, for example, our energy generation with solar instead of burning coal. The coal industry isn't fine with that, but most Americans would be just fine if you could snap your fingers and replace coal burning plants with solar plants. In fact, they would favor that. So it's a popular position. So advocating for renewable energy is largely a popular position to take. Very few people are against energy efficiency. So, if you could have smart thermostats and insulation and heat your home in a more energy efficient way, very few people are against that. But if you tell them you can't eat hamburgers again, then you get that they're going to take away our hamburgers. You get that freedom caucus, if you will, the people who are threatened by the fact that the solution to the crisis is, yes, to take away your hamburgers. And if you keep, for the sake of the animals, I'm against eating hamburgers. But this is not just about the animals. This is about whether human beings are going to be able to breathe on planet Earth in 30, 40, 50 years. And the reality is that animal agriculture is going to prevent that. So, even if somebody doesn't care about animals, doesn't love animals, doesn't believe that animals suffer or whatever they think, this is about whether, your children and grandchildren are going to lead full lives and have a breathable earth.
Explain what causes climate change and why is it happening?
Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere trap infrared heat and send them back towards Earth. And the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Those are three of the most important ones. And the methane and the nitrous oxide are actually far, far, far more powerful than the carbon dioxide, which is the one we hear about all the time. We hear about how many parts per million there are of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But methane will heat the Earth 120 times with the potency of carbon dioxide. These gases are accumulating in the atmosphere. And they are above historic levels. And when you look at a chart of how much carbon dioxide there was in the atmosphere for the last 10,000 years, and temperature for the last 10,000 years, and how much methane there was for the last 10,000 years, it's a hockey stick. Everything was very stable for 10,000 years until the last 50 years. And suddenly it increases almost vertically. So that's what's happening. That's what we're doing to the Earth. And we have to realize that what's happening in the atmosphere is because of what's happening in the Earth. It's very easy to see smokestacks and the emissions from cars and say, that's the problem. It's all the burning of fossil fuels. Well, yes, that's certainly part of the problem, but a molecule of carbon dioxide that comes out of the gas pipe of your car can be absorbed by trees. So we send carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, but the carbon dioxide can be healthfully absorbed by trees. But we only have 3 trillion trees on the planet, and we used to have 6 trillion. So what happened to the other trees? Some of them, yes, got lost because of cities. But more than anything else, we've lost trees. We've had deforestation because of grazing land. So what we need to do, the solution to the problem, is to end grazing and restore forests where we can on the grazing land and get at least 1 trillion more trees and protect the oceans. And then you have the carbon sinks. Then you have the carbon dioxide that could be healthfully absorbed within the oceans and healthfully absorbed within trees. And then if you're still emitting some carbon dioxide from airplanes and from cars and from manufacturing plants, we might be okay. We might be okay with some degree of carbon emissions from fossil fuels as long as we have a healthy Earth. So the solution to the problem is not just to work on fossil fuels, it's to heal the Earth. And the only way we heal the Earth is to stop eating animals.
I think it's difficult for people to really measure in their head. I know it is for me, the expanse of the situation. One of those reasons is it's hard I think it's hard for people to change their ways because we've risen about 2 degrees. And so for most of us, that just doesn't feel like much. And I know this is a question that Alexandra was milling around in, that for the last 20 years, we've kind of heard that we can't go past 350 parts per million of CO2 in the air, but evidently now at about 412. But most of us are still living well. I look outside and there's a blue sky and green trees and beautiful flowers and birds chirping around. And so it doesn't feel drastic to me. It doesn't feel, and I think I'll speak for myself. That's definitely one of the issues that I have with really, really committing in every way, shape, and form to my lifestyle to do something with every activity that I display every day towards protecting the climate. Besides my diet, that's something I never waver on. But how can you paint the drastic picture for us? What does 2 degrees really mean? And what would 2 more degrees mean?
Well, you have to think about, for example, the glaciers melting and that the effect on sea level rise. And if you start to think about New York City going underwater or Florida going underwater, if you start to think, just look at the wildfires we're having in California. So as the droughts and the wildfires get worse, and as the coasts get threatened around the world, we're going to see mass migration, starvation, conflict. As the deserts spread and people can't grow food, it's going to get worse and worse. The Sahara, I point out in Food is Climate, I have an image. This is a NASA satellite map of what's called pasture maintenance fires. Every year, people who graze animals set pasture maintenance fires to burn down everything the cattle didn't eat. And you see that they run up against the desert from the Sahara across to the deserts of the Middle East to the Gobi Desert in China. The Sahara was a forest 10,000 years ago. It was forested for millions and millions and millions of years. So how come 10,000 years ago, or within maybe even 8,000 years ago, within the last 10,000 years, it started to change from a forest to a desert? Well, people got the capacity to chop down trees, and they learned agriculture, and they started grazing goats and other animals on the land. We created the Sahara Desert in large part.
And it's getting bigger. It's getting bigger every year, the Sahara Desert, because of that.
And the few people who live in the Sahara, the occupation they tend to have is animal husbandry. Right. They're going around with their sheep and camels and cattle with a little bit of green left in the desert. And so they're in the environment that occupation helped create. And so just think, what if 20 years from now, we're talking about the Amazonian desert and the California desert? How are people going to feed themselves? How is the earth going to survive? This is what we've done to the earth, and this is what we have to realize. This is the main problem, not airplanes. Airplanes aren't helping, but this is the main problem. If we solve this problem, if we heal the earth, we don't have to worry so much about our thermostats and about airplanes and about manufacturing. Renewable energy is all to the good, but it's not going to solve the problem, because photovoltaic cells and wind turbines, they don't draw down any carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. All they're doing is replacing forces that emit. They're replacing technologies that emit carbon dioxide, but they're not drawing down any carbon dioxide. We need to solve this problem. We need to draw down carbon dioxide. If you will, we need to go on offense. We need to bring it down from the atmosphere. So we need trees, we need healthy oceans, and nothing else will work. And the fact that they could have a COP26 convention in Glasgow for 2 weeks without anybody saying that is a scandal. I'm not a scientist and I can figure that out. So they should be able to figure that out.
Did no one bring it up? I'm surprised because the UN put out a report 16 years ago talking about what was called Livestock's long shadow, where they said that the animal agriculture industry worldwide contributes 18%, which they then lowered to 14.5%. But anyway, it's still a lot. Listen, we won't quibble over a few percentage points. Contributes over 14% of the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere, which is more than all the transportation around the world. I'm amazed there was nobody talking about it, and I didn't follow COP that closely. So was there nobody arguing for that?
As far as I can tell from the coverage of the event, it was a subject that was not on the table, and animals were on the menu. And you know, when the UN initially said 18%, they caught a lot of flack from animal agriculture interests, and then they partnered with animal agriculture interests and they lowered it to 14%. Both of those figures are nonsense. They're not accounting accurately for methane. They're trying to discount the influence of methane.
And how is methane involved with animal ag? You talked about the fact that cows graze and that takes away trees, but then there's the methane component, isn't there?
Right. Methane, they want to, methane degrades over time into carbon dioxide. So they want to use that fact to try to diminish the effect of methane with their accounting. But the truth is that carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere on average only a year because it gets sequestered. So why don't they say that carbon dioxide has a half-life of 1 year instead of saying that methane has a half-life of 10 years? The honest accounting is to say how much does a molecule trap heat when it's emitted into the atmosphere? And the answer to that is methane is 120 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And it actually lasts in the atmosphere on average 10 times as long as carbon dioxide. So if anything, we should multiply it by 10 instead of dividing it. But they also don't account for the most important thing, which is what Dr. Silas Rao calls carbon opportunity cost. What if instead of having grazing land, we had forests? And then all that carbon sequestration would take place. What if instead of the soil being degraded into desert, we had healthy soil that would store so much more carbon? You know, on all the grazing land of the earth, it's 37% of the earth. It stores 2% of the land carbon because the soil has been degraded. So if we had healthy soil with vegetation on it, with forests, the soil would store carbon, the vegetation would store carbon, we'd be sequestering carbon dioxide, and we're giving this all up for the stupidity of eating hamburgers that give us heart attacks and animal agriculture that gives us pandemics. So it's just, you know, it's beyond insane.
Is that a big issue, specifically methane, or is it really much more the land use?
Well, it's both. The methane, we have something like 1.3 billion cows on the earth belching methane. It's a very significant problem. I wrote in Food is Climate that now Cargill and some other companies are thinking of trying to mask the cows to capture the methane. I mean, it's just preposterous. There are plant burgers out there. Just eat plant burgers. What is so hard about that? In order to survive, can't people eat bean burgers and plant burgers, mushroom burgers? It's just so easy to do this. It's incredibly foolish.
So in your book, you give a response, like we've said many times so far, to Al Gore, Bill Gates, and Paul Hawkins. Take us through the response to each one of these gentlemen.
Well, Bill Gates it poses the possibility, why don't we all go vegan? And then he says, yeah, that would seem to be a very good solution, but it's very, very difficult to do because so many cultures in the world incorporate animal eating into their festivals. Well, that's true. We have turkey at Thanksgiving. We have burgers July 4th, and all around the world, you could find cultures that incorporate eating animals into their festivals. That's true. But imagine if Bill Gates spent a fraction of his money putting on TV commercials and messaging the idea that we can have, instead of turkey, we can have tofurkey, or we can have other things, and that we need to do. I mean, this isn't such a hard problem to solve, to change cultures. You know,
Wouldn't be winning the popularity contest that he likes to win.
well, there you go, you know, but that was his reason. He also did some very poor math that I corrected in the book about how much trees can help.
Tell us about that math.
Well, he actually overestimated how much trees can help. So I had to correct him and say, gee, I wish this were true, but it was 25% of what he said. But I'm open, as he isn't open, to saying we can have 1 trillion or more trees because we can end grazing. You know, he's just thinking, well, you plant a few trees in parks here and there, it's not going to do much good. And so even though he overestimated how much a tree can sequester, he underestimated how many trees we can have. After all, the world used to have 6 trillion trees. Is there some reason why it's not as big now? It can only have 3 trillion? It's silly. For Paul Hawkins, to me, the problem is just that he has to get over being such a nice guy who doesn't want to offend people, and risk offending people by saying, for the planet, we have to do this. Never mind even for the animals. For the planet, for human beings, if we're going to have a future, we have to stop the foolishness. And he wouldn't like the word foolishness because it's judgmental. So let me point out, I'm saying foolishness without any judgment. But we have to stop the foolishness of eating animals, since it's killing us and since it's destroying the planet. And then for Al Gore, well, he's just got to get over his political instincts and be willing to tell the truth. This isn't all about fossil fuels, even though it's easier to show an image of smoke going out of a chimney than to show an image of a forest that used to exist that now is grazing land.
Yeah. If we could even get to a place where they and many others, including COP26, were just to encourage people that it's not all or nothing, it's all or something. And to say, okay, I'll just try this 1 meal a day, or, you know, more 10 meals a week, or dinner at whatever it might be, because then you start to take the journey down the beauty of plant-based food. You realize it's delicious and satiating and spicy and flavorful and wonderful. And hey, I can do this a little bit more often. We're not even there. I wish they would even get to that conversation of, hey, listen, I do this 6 times a week. So I challenge you guys to try it even that much. People have to be able to dip their toe in and understand and experience and enjoy the food to even, then that eliminates that problem that we're saying of, oh my gosh, no, I have to have a burger. You try a bunch of plant-based burgers and you go, oh yeah, hey, wow, I can. This is delicious. And this does make me feel like I'm having that experience.
And people should do this for their own health.
Well, right.
I tried in my book, Own Your Health, to counter all the foolish myths like that we need to eat meat for the protein, or that there's something wrong with carbohydrate, or
Yeah.
All this nonsense that people have been fed, it shows a lack of understanding of health and nutrition. I have a chapter in Own Your Health that's about carbohydrates. People are afraid of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are one of the macronutrients, right? There's carbohydrate, there's protein, and there's fat. And sometimes some people like to call fiber another macronutrient. Americans get too much protein, and you can't store protein. So this idea of eating meat for protein, well, if you're getting too much protein, you're just urinating out the excess. So what's the point? Yeah. And T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, and all his research showed that animal protein is carcinogenic. So you want plant protein, you don't want animal protein. And then the carbohydrates, well, that's the fuel of the brain. That's our normal human fuel. Mm-hmm. And it comes from a misunderstanding because people think of something like white bread as carbohydrates. Well, what we're talking about is whole plant foods, potatoes, sweet potatoes, fruit, vegetables. So these are the healthiest foods. And when you eat these foods and you eat them exclusively, you eat just plant foods, your health always improves. You know, I'm 65 years old. I've never had to take a drug in my life. You know, so, and I come from a family with terrible heart disease. Mm-hmm. So this works. And everybody I know who does it, it works. I've never known it not to work.
But Glenn, there is, as Dotsie said, that there is a lot of resistance. And we've spoken to, it was David Blatt on one of our shows who wrote a book about why do good people eat meat and support such a cruel and, an industry that's going to kill us. And what he came up with was that it's so deeply ingrained culturally and how we were raised that logic, like this is healthier for you, isn't going to really move the needle. It's just people who really, ethical vegans who really identify as being, that their values are super important to them and their identity, who become vegan ethically and stay vegan. And then health-wise, usually it's a crisis. You've written a lot of books about how to help people change. Do you think the answer is in individual change or systemic change? Or both, like Dotsie and Switch for Good are working on both sides of the issue. She's working with the government or against the government, right, Dotsie, to try and get serious change in terms of the subsidies. But she's also working to inspire people to go dairy-free.
Right. Well, I think it has to be both. We should try to work with government where we can, but I certainly wouldn't rely on government. And again, I believe in democracy. I want to have a democracy, but right now we're in the minority. So to the extent that, I mean, the one thing I hope that we could get government to do is at least stop aggravating the problem by subsidizing animal agriculture. If we could just get them to stop subsidizing animal agriculture, the price of a cheeseburger would go through the roof and nothing could be better for human health. But even that is terribly difficult. The one thing the Republicans and the Democrats agree on is they want to subsidize animal agriculture. They want to keep with these farm subsidies. Even that is difficult, and that should be easy. So until government can respond, then we just need individuals to change their own diets. And I guess the best analogy of a political change would be gay marriage. If Barack Obama had run in 2008 advocating gay marriage, he might well have lost. It wasn't politically popular then. But within 2 terms of his presidency, it became politically popular, and he was able to endorse gay marriage, and the Supreme Court then made it the law of the land. So that happened so fast, and it happened from a grassroots level. It happened because Americans began to change their attitudes from watching TV shows, from reading, just culturally, as younger people replaced older people and younger people are more progressive on this issue. The attitudes changed and we have gay marriage in this country. So what we need is the young people to go vegan. We need is to get the message out as much as possible. And if enough people will go vegan, and I would love it if it's 100%, but if we can get to 30%, 40%, it's going to destroy animal agriculture. They're not going to be able to keep going if 30 or 40% of the people aren't buying their products. So that's where we have to get, and we're probably at 4% now or something like that. So we have a long way to go. But that to me is the hope. And then the hope is if America goes vegan, the world will go vegan. We can really set the standard for the world if we'll do this.
Mm-hmm. Is there any country currently right now that has changed its farm policies to in any nth of degrees and encouraging its citizens to adopt a plant-forward diet?
That's a good question. I think I read something recently, and it might have been the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite up on it, so I don't want to say. But I think that it might have been Denmark. It may have been Denmark that is starting to take some actions in support of plant-based eating.
So what I'm hearing from you, Glenn, is that individually, we need to work towards changing consumers. They have an influence on the market and on politicians.
Yeah.
And then the United States, because we're here in the United States, but governments in general need to stop subsidizing the animal ag industry. Is there anything else you would say that we should push for?
Well, yes, we should push for doctors to learn nutrition in medical school. Again, that's an issue I wrote about in Own Your Health. We have, just think about the insanity of doctors going for 4 years of training in medical school and not learning anything about nutrition. And that is a lesson in itself, because if you're being trained to take care of people's health, and nobody even brings up the subject of what people eat, it obviously couldn't be very important, right? So they learn this subliminal lesson that nutrition couldn't possibly be very important. And then you find that half the doctors in America are overweight and not in great shape. There are some wonderful doctors now, and there's the plantrition movement and the lifestyle medicine movement, and we've got more and more young doctors who are learning the truth and doing what they should do, which is when they meet with a patient, they ask, what have you been eating? Here's what you should eat. And they could actually help people that way instead of just give people medicines. But we have a system that has been, we have a food system that creates disease and a medical system that's effectively working for the drug industry to keep diseased people alive as long as possible as they take their medicines, instead of doing what a doctor should do and heal people.
Also, I want to point out, and this has happened with another issue that I care very much about, which is human numbers, human overpopulation. Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawkins, all of them. I've been in contact with their organizations. They skirt the issue because it's highly unpopular, and they're afraid of the reaction. Right. Environmental organizations also were really, really late to the game when it came to animal ag.
Right. Well, right? I happen to agree with you. And in my novel, Off the Reservation, my candidate, Evan Gorgoni, who runs for president, makes that an issue. He says on Meet the Press, there are too many people in the world. And at one point in a campaign rally, he says, look at the size of this crowd, and everybody cheers. And he says, you see my point?
Right.
So there are too many people in the world, but it's a very, very touchy issue. As you know, it touches on religion and culture again. And the truth is,
eating, like food.
Yeah, Yeah. And the truth is that we probably could support the population we have on the earth, and maybe even a little more, if we were all on a plant-based diet. But it sure would be easier if cultures around the world would start promoting, one child per family or whatever, and I don't know, give a tax break to people who don't have children instead of just tax breaks for each child.
The environmental organizations, though, also, what do you see in terms of them, climate change and animal ag?
Well, the movie Cowspiracy showed how the environmental organizations don't want to touch the issue of diet. And again, it's a scandal because they're supposed to be in the business of helping the environment, and they're ignoring the single greatest threat to the environment, which is animal agriculture. It's hard to respect them for being so spineless. And all they're caring about is they worry that some of their supporters wouldn't renew their memberships or something. But they're either supposed to be caring about the environment or not.
Is there anything else you want to make sure that our audience knows about your book and some of the points that you make before we break off and talk about David Hasselhoff?
And how David Hasselhoff ended my screenwriting career.
Oh my God. Okay.
There's a point I make in Own Your Health, which is that this is not a battle between science and science. This is a battle between science and culture. All the science is on our side. All the science of health. We have 60 years of studies that the plant-based diet is best to prevent and reverse heart disease. Dr. Esselstyn did his study in which he took heart patients who had so many heart attacks and strokes, and he put them on the diet we eat, and they all got better and reversed their heart disease. And the only ones who didn't were the ones who weren't compliant with his diet. He proved that twice in 2 different studies. Nobody's doing a study of heart patients and saying, let's feed them sausage and eggs and roast beef and see if that'll heal their heart disease. Nobody would do that study because it would be insane, because everybody knows it would kill them. And so we know what works. And doesn't it make sense that the same diet that helps you with heart disease also helps you with diabetes? Well, it does. And we could reverse diabetes with a low-fat, type 2 diabetes, with a low-fat plant-based diet. And it's the best diet for inflammation, to prevent inflammation. And so you begin to realize that there's a reason for this, and it's because it's our natural food. You look to who are our cousins, the great apes. Great apes don't get up in the morning, have scrambled eggs and then a corned beef sandwich and then a steak. They eat leaves, salad, they eat leaves, they eat fruit, So it's so obvious that we should be on the diet of the chimpanzees that we share 97% of our DNA with. Now, I mentioned in On Your Health, the truth is that, yes, occasionally a chimpanzee, a male chimpanzee, will kill. This is a terrible thing, and I'm angry about it. But occasionally, a male chimpanzee will kill a monkey and rip across its living flesh to give to a female chimpanzee in exchange for sex. And that is terrible behavior, and I'm not going to condone that. But they're not doing it for nutritional reasons. They're doing it to get laid. So you have to kind of balance that.
You have to forgive them for that.
You have to forgive them that.
That's the male anything.
97% of their diet is a plant-based diet. And those are our cousins, the chimpanzees. So it's just obvious that this should be our diet. And then all the science on climate tells us that this is what we should be doing for the climate. So you have all the science in the world on our side, and what's against us is culture.
Yeah.
What's against us is the people who grew up eating corned beef, and the people who grew up eating lamb, and the people who grew up eating turkey, and their mamas fed it to them, and they love their mommy, and that's what we're up against, culture.
Yeah.
And that's what Bill Gates felt was just too great an obstacle to risk countering. You know, I don't see what's so rough. Cultures have changed in the past. We can change the culture.
Well, you just mentioned how we changed the culture in a generation when it came to gay rights and the acceptance of homosexuality. Mm-hmm.
Right. And does that bring me to how David Hasselhoff ended my screenwriting career?
Yes.
Go for it, Glenn.
All right. Here's how David Hasselhoff, and I never met them. But
too bad. He's a wonderful, wonderful man.
I'll bet he is. But he ended my screenwriting career. And here's why. I've written a number of screenplays, and I have a friend who's a movie producer who's made about 80 movies, usually low budget movies. And my friend calls me up in the last year and says he's got a guy, a financier, who wants to make a movie. He's got some clients who are apparently influencers. He's like a manager of influencers. These are young women who take pictures of themselves and put it on Instagram. And I don't know, they twerk on TikTok or something. And this is apparently a career choice now. So he wants to make a movie featuring these non-actors. These are not actors. And make a movie about them. And so my friend calls me up and he says, can you pitch to this guy tomorrow a story? So I have to come up overnight with a story for 6 non-acting, twerking influencers. And one more twist in it. This guy, the financier, is a friend of David Hasselhoff. I need a role for David Hasselhoff. So I say, sure, I'll come up with that overnight. So I go to sleep without an idea in my head. I wake up at 2 a.m. Eureka, I got the idea. What if David Hasselhoff is the manager of all these influencers, and he's like their coach, he's like their life coach, and they all come up with a different reason for hating him, and then he gets poisoned, and it becomes like a comic murder mystery called Who Killed David Hasselhoff? So I pitched that idea, and the financier seems to really like it, and they'll get back to me in a couple of days. And he gets back to me and he says, there's already a movie called Who Killed David Hasselhoff, or Killing David Hasselhoff.
Yes.
So at that point I said, I'm out. If there are clearly too many movies, if there's already a movie called Killing David Hasselhoff, I'm out. And that ended my screenwriting career.
Oh, that's very funny, Glenn. Yeah. Well, I personally am very glad that you're writing books, because they are definitely changing hearts and minds and making a difference in the world, more than probably that screenplay about the 6 influencers being managed by David Hasselhoff. So maybe actually David Hasselhoff is saving the world by bringing you back to books.
All right, that's a good spin to put on it.
Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Alexandra and Dotsy.
Loved it. Hey, folks. Okay, back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.